Okay, we're moving on to subtracting integers. And you need your yellow folder again, take your notes, and if you might want to stop and pause this video to do that. So we're going to begin. Again, we're going to show you some examples how to subtract integers using the chips, the integer chips. And the best way to do that is we're just going to lay them out on our paper here. So again, our red chips are the negative ones, and the yellow chips are positive chips. Now let's do some examples using our chips. Let's take and let's start with an example like -6 minus -2. And this one here, so let's take, and we're going to say -6, so we're going to start with six red chips, that's for a -6. So there we go. And then we're going to subtract a -2. And this is pretty easy because all we have to do is just take away 2 red chips, and we are left with a -4. So 4 red chips. And that's pretty simple. And we'll go on and do another example. Let's take and start this time with a -5. And we're going to subtract a -1. And again, we put the brackets around that just to kind of keep our numbers clear. So again, start with a -5. And there we go. And if we want to subtract a -1, all we do is take 1 chip away, and we are left with a -4. So one more like that. It's pretty simple. Well, this time we'll take our chips, and we're going to start with a -7, and we're going to take away a -4. And we're going to keep our numbers kind of small when we use the integer chips, because we can't pile a whole bunch of chips on our paper. So -7, it's kind of about as many as we can get across here. So 2, 4, 6, 7. And we want to take away a -4. So we just do that. We take away a -4, 4 red chips, and that leaves us with a -3. So I think you probably have the idea of that. If you don't, go back and just replay back the first part of this lesson. So we're going to move on now to what happens when we start with a negative number and we subtract a positive number. So for example, so now let's move to an example like this, a -3, and we want to subtract a +1. So let's lay out our chips. A -3, so 3 chips. And if you don't have chips, you can just do this. You can just say, okay, well, this is put down little pluses. We can go like this. A -3, so I got a negative chip, and a negative chip. We can put little X's on our paper as well. And then we're going to do this. We're going to take away a positive chip. Well, in this situation, we can't do that. So what we have to do is to add a negative, or a 0 pair. A 0 pair, again, of course, is a negative and a positive. So we're going to add 1 0 pair, because in order to subtract a positive, we have to have a positive chip. So in this case, we're going to, now if we subtract our positive 1, we are left with a -4. And so, and again, too, in our paper pencil example, if we have -3, and then we are going to subtract a 1, we have to add a -0 pair in order to do that. So we add a negative and a positive, and then we subtract out that positive, so cancel that out, and we are left with 1, 2, 3, a -4. Let's try another more example like that, and I'll put it on paper. I'll show you how to draw it as well as use the chips. So let's take this example. Let's take let's start with a -5, and let's subtract a +3. Now, if you don't have the chips, that's not a big deal, so we'll just take and go with, we'll draw 5 negative chips. So then 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we want to subtract a positive 3. Well, we don't have any positive chips to subtract, so we have to add 3. But in order to add 3 positive chips, we have to add them as a 0 pair. So there's a positive and a 0 pair. There is a second 0 pair and a third 0 pair. That now allows us to have 3 positives to subtract. So now let's do that. Let's subtract our 3 positive chips, 1, 2, 3, so we're going to X them out. And we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 red chips. So a negative 8. And I'll show you with the chips now what that looks like. So we started with a negative 5, where we have 5 red chips, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But we have no yellow chips to subtract, no positive chips to subtract. So we have to add some zero pairs. So we have, there's one 0 pair, there's a second 0 pair, and here is a third 0 pair. So now that we have our 3 0 pairs, we can also line them up like this if you like on the end, just to kind of, so it's a little bit easier to see them. Doesn't matter the order that you do it, really. I'll just put these over here so we have a little bit of room. So there's our 0 pairs. So we added 3 0 pairs. Now we take away our positive 3, 1, 2, 3, and we are left with a total of 8 red chips. Now we'll do another example like that, and again I'll draw on paper because you probably don't have chips at home to do this. So we're going to draw on paper. We're going to take an example like this, negative 7 minus a positive 2. So on paper, our negative 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we have no positive chips to subtract, so we have to add 2 0 pair, 1 and 2. There's our 2 0 pairs. And if we subtract the 2 positives, 1, 2, subtract those out, put an X over the top, we are left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 red chips. So I'll put those on the table for you. And so again, we start with negative 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, negative 7. And since we didn't have any positive chips to subtract, we have to add them as a 0 pair. So we have to add 2 0 pairs. So there is 1, and there is 2 0 pairs. Now we can subtract our 2 positive chips, and we are left with 9 red chips, or negative chips. Let's see how this problem works out if we did this on a number line, and give you another way to kind of think about it. So if we're going to draw a number line here, just use your straight edge. You might want to stop and grab your straight edge. And to make this number line big enough, we're going to start with 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll do up to 6 there. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll go down to negative 6 there, just to make it big enough so we can have some room to work. So let's take our number line and take a look at what happens when we have negative numbers. And so let's do one of our examples from up here. Let's take our first example, negative 6 minus a negative 2. So if we go negative 6, so we start at 0 and go negative 6. So our problem was negative 6 minus a negative 2. Now if we were adding this, we would say negative 6 plus 2 plus positive 2, we would go to the right. But we're subtracting, so we want to do the opposite of adding. We want to subtract. So instead of coming to the right, we're going to go to the left. So it's kind of like adding the opposite. So we're going to go 2 more negative. So we're going to go down to a negative 8. Now that probably sounds a little bit confusing. We'll do that in another example like that. So let's take and do a second example where we have, let's take a problem like this. We end up with, in this case, negative 8. So now let's kind of box that off to keep that separate. Let's do a problem like this. If we have we start with 3, and we want to subtract 5. So in this case, we would go, I'm going to put down below, we're going to go positive 3. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to subtract 5. So instead of going backwards, going like we would be adding, we'd go negative 5, we're going to kind of do the opposite. It's like we're going to add the opposite of 5, we're going to add a negative 5. So we went 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to go the opposite of subtracting. We're going to add, and we're going to add the opposite of 5, which is a negative 5. So now we're going to go, instead of keeping going to the right, we're going to go to the left 5 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to land. Okay, we got interrupted there for a second, but we're going from a 3, and we're going to take away 5. So when we're subtracting integers, kind of a little bit confusing, but we have to start with 3, and we're going to take away 5. So it's kind of like we're adding the opposite. We're going to add an opposite or negative 5. Let's see what that looks like when we use our chips. So if we start with a 3, start with 3 positive chips, and we want to take away 5. Now we only have 3, we don't have 5 positive chips to take away. So we're going to add 2 0 pairs, which will give us 5 positives. So we're going to take away our 5 positive chips, which leaves us with a negative 2. Now we kind of get interrupted in there. The video stopped a little bit and kind of interrupted us, so we're going to have to probably go back and do some other examples of that. I'm going to turn the page over. Let's go to page 545, and let's go down to number 1 down at the bottom of the page just to kind of see what happens. So if we start with a 4 and we want to subtract 6, and we're just going to use our pluses and minuses here. So let's use a plus 4. We're going to start with a plus 4, and we want to subtract plus 6. So we want to subtract a plus 6. Well, we don't have 6 to subtract, so we have to add on 2 0 pairs in order to allow us to subtract 6. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we end up with a negative 2. Now, from master in 5th grade, this is probably what you kind of started to do when you had a problem like this. You had 4 minus 6, which you couldn't do, so basically it's kind of like adding the opposite. If we start with 4 and we add the opposite of 6, which is negative 6, now you know how to add and subtract negative and positive numbers. If you start with 4, so you go in your number line 4 places this way, and then you go back 6 places this way, you're going to end up at a negative 2. Like we did yesterday. Then it comes back to just adding and subtracting integers. So we end up with a negative 2. Let's go number 2. We have 7, and we're going to subtract 10. So we have, start with 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we want to subtract positive 10, which we don't have enough positives to subtract, so we're going to add 1, 2, 3. We have to add them as 0 pairs. So now if we subtract 10,